The most powerful military on Earth used advanced technology to track a boat near Venezuela and then fired high-powered missile artillery, precision kinetic strikes, to decimate the boat, all of its cargo, including the 11 people on board. They were successful in immediately killing 9 of the passengers. The boat capsized and was lit up in a fiery blaze of death and destruction. As they monitored the wreckage, they saw 2 survivors desperately trying to save themselves by flipping what remained of the boat and climbing on top. They took their shirts off, checked themselves for mortal wounds, and began waving their arms in what was likely a sign of surrender. They were not waving weapons around. This was not a firefight. The boat was incapacitated, the motor destroyed. There was no high-speed chase. This was the US military monitoring shipwrecked survivors on a capsized hull. That's when they decided to strike them again, to kill them. What was left was a bloodstain on the water that would later nauseate the congressmen that watched the full video to the point that they almost threw up. The video of the boat strike released to the public was edited to cut out that pertinent detail, that there were survivors in the wreckage, that the boat was struck not just once, but multiple times. They blurred out the on-screen data that would reveal what they were trying to hide from you, the American public. They killed the survivors of a shipwreck under the direct orders of the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and the Secretary of the Department of War, Pete Hegseth. That's the story. And there are only 2 lanes here, 2 options for how this played out. If we are in a declared war with the drug cartels, if we are in armed conflict where we are confronting a direct and imminent threat to the citizens of the United States, then this was a war crime, where history shows that those committing this exact crime were put to death. If we are not at war, as the Trump administration has not sought Congress to declare, as required by US law, and we're not in armed conflict with terrorists threatening US citizens, then this is cold-blooded murder. I'm going to show you the tape, the orders, and the excuses, and let you decide which it is. We will look deeper into the reason this is really happening, whether bombing a boat off the coast of Venezuela is about drugs in the US, or if this is really about something else. We will look past the trust me bro antics of Pete Hegseth and this administration, and we will see that the lies that they tell the American public in press conferences and cabinet meetings get swept away in the undercurrent when we start to look into the deeper, darker story behind all of this. They want you to not trust your lying eyes when you see what evidence and facts surface with a little digging. So make sure to stick around until the end of this video, where we will shine a glaring light on the secret agenda they want to keep hidden in the darkness, and how their actions show the true intentions of their murderous plans. I'll give you a hint. Our government's crimes of bombing boats full of people 1,500 miles away from the US coastline is not about drugs. It's about something else entirely. Let's start by taking a look at where this all begins. On September 2nd, 2025, Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social that on his orders, U.S. military forces conducted a kinetic strike against Tren de Aragua narco-terrorists that were operating under the control of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. He goes on to say that they were at sea in international waters, transporting illegal narcotics heading to the United States, and that 11 terrorists were killed in the action. It is important to note that he specifically says that these military actions occurred on his orders. It's also interesting that he claims that these narco-terrorists were operating under the control of Nicolas Maduro, as if Maduro is the head of this terrorist organization that is specifically sending drugs to the United States. Pay close attention to the fact that he says that they were operating in international waters, that they were trafficking narcotics. Also pay attention that he says that the total number of 11 terrorists were killed, but he also leaves out the important detail that 2 of those people were shipwrecked survivors that were victims of a second strike. As we watch the video, take a look at how the video jumps around, how the first explosion doesn't quite match up when the video jumps into the second explosion, and that there's no indication of how much time elapsed in between those 2 strikes. So one of the biggest concerns that arose was when reporting started coming out that Pete Hegseth had told his military to kill everybody. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth gave a verbal directive according to 2 people with direct knowledge of the operation. The order was to kill everybody. A missile screamed off the Trinidad coast, striking the vessel and igniting a blaze from bow to stern. For minutes, commanders watched the boat burning on a live drone feed. As the smoke cleared, they got a jolt. 2 survivors were clinging to the smoldering wreck. So the Special Operations Commander overseeing the September 2nd attack, the opening salvo in the Trump administration's war on suspected drug traffickers in the Western Hemisphere, ordered a second strike to comply with Hegseth's instructions. The 2 men were blown apart in the water. Now, a little backstory to Pete Hegseth. He was appointed as the Secretary of the Department of Defense, but he didn't really see things that way. Department of Defense was too weak. He wants to go on the offensive as the Department of War. He puts up a new sign in front of his office at the Pentagon, even though Congress has not approved this name change. Now, as you'll recall, Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump called in military leaders from all around the world to give what is essentially a stunt, a speech to those war generals about their intentions. And I think that it becomes very clear once you hear exactly what Pete Hegseth said about whether or not that they are going to follow rules of engagement, whether they're going to follow the laws of war.
War is something you do sparingly, on our own terms, and with clear aims. We fight to win. We unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy. We also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement. Just common sense, maximum lethality, and authority for warfighters.
And in this next video, where we will see Pete Hegseth again talking about the narco-terrorists, where he specifically says that we will find you and we will kill you. There's no mincing of words here. There's no, we are going to arrest you. We are going to bring you in. We are going to prosecute you. We are going to bring you to justice. None of that. No, we are just simply going to kill you.
Where we are dedicated to the counter-cartel effort here. Criminality knows no boundaries, whether it's the United States of America and Washington, D.C., or it's the Caribbean and the Western Hemisphere. We are going to go after narco-terrorists. It will not stand. Our borders will be secure, whether it's the Dominican Republic or the United States of America, and we look forward to working with our partners to make it happen. You know, President Trump believes in a clear principle: peace through strength. You get peace by being strong. And if you're a narco-terrorist who wants to bring drugs to the United States of America, we will find you, we will fix you, and we will finish you, because we have all the rights in the world. We've got lots of attorneys and lots of intel analysts, and we know exactly who we're targeting and why. If you're involved in that conduct, we will kill you.
And so it seems like when it comes to narco-terrorists, we're all about murder. We're all about killing you. We're not about bringing you to justice. In some ways, I understand. If we are at war with another country, if we are at war with the drug cartels, then sometimes things have to happen. But that raises an interesting question. Are we at war with the drug cartels? President Trump was asked this question as to whether or not he was going to ask Congress for a declaration of war. And this is what he said.
And Mr. President, if you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay? Yeah.
So no prosecution, no bringing you to a court of law, no proof, no evidence. We're just going to kill you. We're going to blow you up with bombs. We're going to blow you out of the water. We're just going to kill you. That's it. And based on that principle, we have been continuously blowing up boats near Venezuela. Let's see exactly what that's led to. So as of December 9th, 2025, there have been 23 confirmed released strikes on boats in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean since September of 2025, since that very first strike. There have been a confirmed 87 deaths associated with those strikes. Now we're going to fast forward to a report or statement made by the former JAGS working group, which is a group of about 40 retired senior military lawyers formed in early 2025, notably after Defense Secretary Hegseth's controversial actions, including allegedly firing top JAGs and pushing commanders to ignore legal advice. A JAG is a judge advocate, serving as military prosecutors known as trial counsel and handling criminal cases under the Uniform Code of Military Justice in courts martial. But they also work in many other legal fields like defense, international law, and advising commanders. We're going to take a look at the report that they put out, and it is scathing. So on November 29th, 2025, they issued this statement. Yesterday, the Washington Post and CNN reported that the Secretary of Defense personally issued orders to kill everybody aboard a civilian vessel suspected of narco trafficking. The attack on the 2nd of September 2025 targeted a vessel carrying 11 civilians and, allegedly, an unknown quantity of drugs. The first strike resulted in near total destruction of the vessel. However, 2 survivors were apparently observed via surveillance video clinging to the wreckage, whereupon the commander directing the operation ordered a second strike. The second strike killed both survivors. The former JAGS working group unanimously considers both the giving and the execution of these orders, if true, to constitute war crimes, murder, or both. If the U.S. military operation to interdict and destroy suspected narco-trafficking vessels is a non-international armed conflict, as the Trump administration suggests, orders to kill everybody, which can reasonably be regarded as an order to give no quarter, and to double tap a target in order to kill survivors are clearly illegal under international law. In short, they are war crimes. If the U.S. military operation is not an armed conflict of any kind, these orders to kill helpless civilians clinging to the wreckage of a vessel our military destroyed would subject everyone from the Secretary of Defense down to the individual who pulled the trigger to prosecution under U.S. law for murder. And here at the bottom, since orders to kill survivors of an attack at sea are patently illegal, anyone who issues or follows such orders can and should be prosecuted for war crimes, murder, or both. And so if it's true that the order was given to kill everybody, regardless of whether or not they were shipwrecked, whether they were active combatants, whether or not that they were still a threat, if that's true, then that would constitute a war crime. Pete Hegseth gave us some insight as to what should happen to people who commit war crimes such as this 9 years ago when he said this.
I do think there have to be consequences for abject war crimes. If you're doing something that is just completely unlawful and ruthless, then there is a consequence for that. That's why the military said it won't follow unlawful orders from their commander-in-chief. There's a standard, there's an ethos, there's a belief that we are above what so many things that our enemies or others would do.
And that is why some civilians have taken it upon themselves to rebrand Pete Hegseth as the head of the Department of War Crimes. So a big part of the question becomes, did Pete Hegseth give the orders to kill everyone? Originally, the Trump administration's position was that Pete Hegseth knew nothing about the strikes in the Caribbean, knew nothing about the double tap, or possibly wasn't even there for the strikes. But we're going to go back and look at exactly what Pete Hegseth said on September 3rd on Fox News.
So the president is sending a message to other cartels, right?
A very clear one. I can tell you that was definitely not artificial intelligence. I watched it live. We knew exactly who was in that boat. We knew exactly what they were doing, and we knew exactly who they represented. And that was Tren de Aragua, a narco-terrorist organization designated by the United States, trying to poison our country with illicit drugs.
Whoops. So he was there. He was in the room. He watched it live. He was definitely a part of that strike. He was there giving commands, giving orders, overseeing the operation. So once that became exposed and he started being asked about that, let's see how he then shifts the narrative and tries to change his explanation and his reasoning as far as his excuses go for what happened in that room.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And he was the right call. We have his back, and the American people are safer because narco-terrorists know you can't bring drugs through the water and eventually on land if necessary to the American people. We will eliminate that threat, and we're proud to do it.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after that first strike?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war.
Okay, so he claims now that he was there for the first strike, but had, a lot of business to do. I'm a busy person, so I left the room. Later on, found out that there was a second strike, which he fully supports that second strike. What you don't see him do is deny giving the orders to kill everyone. He could have given that order in the meeting during that first strike. He could have said, kill him, make sure everyone's dead, make sure that this is obliterated. But another issue that he now creates is describing this as the fog of war. And let me tell you, he's mistaken about what the fog of war is. Again, because he's a Fox News host, he's a mouthpiece for this war, he's a mouthpiece for criminality, and I don't really think that he knows what the fog of war means. He says that there was smoke, there was fire, that's the fog of war. Let's take a look at exactly what that means. So the term fog of war comes from the Prussian theorist of war, Karl von Clausewitz, to whom the fog of war is attributed. By fog, what he meant was the rapid obsolescence of the original war plan when confronted with the uncertainty of battle. Basically, that you have a war plan, all of a sudden battle starts happening, things go crazy, bombs are coming out of nowhere. These are things that you didn't plan for, and you have to make a decision in the moment, right then. That is what he was describing as the fog of war. That's what people mean by the fog of war. Not, oh, there was a little bit of smoke, there was fire from the boat, there was this and that. That's not what fog of war means. And so with these missile strikes killing 82 men in open boats, including the 2 adrift in the ocean, there's no uncertainty around that. There is no fog of war. These are deliberate decisions being made to kill people. And that position is solidified by this reporting from CNN that these things weren't done in immediate wartime action with insane bombs and all of these things going on around you. Instead, if we look at the report, it was for 41 minutes that Bradley and the rest of the U.S. Military Command Center discussed what to do as they watched the men struggle to overturn what was left of their boat. There is no fog of war here. It's another thing that Hegseth is trying to spin. It's what he's trying to hide behind, this idea of fog of war, and it's patently false. It becomes immediately clear that he has no idea what he's talking about and that he is highly unqualified for the position that he is currently in. So that's the position that Hegseth takes in order to defend the actions of bombing this boat more than once. The initial strike didn't kill all of the occupants of the boat. They watched for 41 minutes, and then they decided to strike the boat again to kill the other occupants of the boat. But it gets worse. Tom Cotton, a MAGA Republican who has defended Trump no matter what actions Trump does, continues to bend over backwards to protect Donald Trump and his regime. He was part of a briefing behind closed doors in which afterwards he came out to speak to the press and to the American public to say this.
The first strike, the second strike, and the third and the fourth strike on September 2nd were entirely lawful and needful, and they were exactly what we'd expect our military commanders to do.
So Tom Cotton reveals that there were 4 kinetic missile artillery strikes on that boat, which is pretty well summed up by this Twitter post that the official story that we've been told up until this point was that the boat was hit twice. But instead, what actually happened was that their boat is destroyed, they're wounded, they claw their way onto a capsized chunk of the bow, and then the most powerful military on Earth apparently hits them again and again and again over the course of 48 minutes until no one is left. They're right to say that this keeps getting worse. So then, to make matters worse, Tom Cotton goes on NBC News to try to defend these strikes, claiming that these people were not shipwrecked survivors, but were still immediate threats to the United States of America.
All started with a Washington Post story about 9 days ago that said after the first strike, there were 2 survivors that were helpless, and then they were ordered to kill these helpless survivors. That is simply not the case. They were not floating in the ocean on a wooden plank or in life jackets. They were on the capsized vessel. They were not incapacitated in any way. It was entirely appropriate to strike the boat again to make sure that cargo was destroyed. It is in no way violation of the law of war. And I think
so. If you listen closely, he says that it wasn't that there was a strike, we saw survivors, and then he puts emphasis, and then the order was given to kill them. So it sounds like the order was given to kill them ahead of time, kill everyone. He tries to say that they were not wounded, that they were not incapacitated in any way, as if they are still a threat on a burning boat with the motor destroyed, that they are still a threat, that their biggest concern is, we just got bombed, I'm still alive, let me take these drugs and we're going to get these to America. I simply don't think that that's the case. And I think we'll probably see information and facts later in this video that are going to refute that evidence. And then next we're going to see Tom Cotton on CNN furthering this story, giving more information as to what he believes was happening in his briefing as far as what he saw in the video. And as you can hear, he continues to spin a web of lies or possibilities. Well, maybe they were doing this, maybe they were doing that. Let's see what he has to say here.
So it doesn't mean they weren't trying to access communications equipment on the boat, or that they didn't have any of their drug trafficking pals trying to come pick them up because they were just off the waters or just off the coast of Venezuela. And that's a known area for drug cartels.
Did you see any evidence of them trying to use a radio in the video you saw?
Well, I saw lots of evidence of them standing on the boat that had been capsized.
That wasn't my question. Did you see any evidence of them
trying to get it back up, trying to flip it over?
Did you see any evidence of them trying to use a radio?
No, I didn't, John. No, John, but they were clearly not incapacitated. They were not distressed. One guy took his T-shirt off like he was sunbathing. They were trying to get the boat back up and to continue their mission of spreading these drugs all across America.
Did they get the boat back up?
That's what they were doing, and that's why Admiral Bradley ordered the second strike. Well, no, they didn't, because we killed them, and we were right to kill them, and Admiral Bradley was totally justified in a decision he made. A decision, by the way, that was broadcast on multiple secure screens at the Pentagon and Fort Bragg, and that hundreds of people watched in real time with probably dozens of JAG lawyers.
No, they didn't get those drugs to the U.S. because we killed them. They weren't able to radio anyone, even though he didn't see any radio, even though he didn't see them attempting to do so. If the boats are really that big of a threat to the United States, I mean, obviously they are within a really close distance to the United States to get those drugs here. They're an imminent threat to the shorelines of America. Or are they? Let's see exactly where that boat strike happened. Obviously, as you can see far up in the upper left-hand corner, this is the United States of America. That's Florida. All the way down here is Venezuela, and this little red circle is where that strike happened. Now, that wasn't a huge shipping vessel that is made to travel long distances. This is a tiny boat that, as we'll see, would have to refuel 20 times minimum to make it to the United States of America. This is what they want you to believe is the threat to our shoreline, to our American citizens. This is why they have to blow people up and continue to blow up their boat and the personnel on that boat to make sure that those drugs way down here don't make it to the United States of America, that they are an immediate threat to the United States of America, as if someone's holding a gun to your head. Immediate threat. And I don't buy it. As a matter of fact, what we're going to see in a second is that this boat wasn't even headed in the direction of the United States. It wasn't headed to the northwest. It was actually headed to Suriname, here, to the east and to the south, literally the opposite direction of the United States. And Tom Cotton was asked about this. Let's see again what he had to say.
You're saying this boat was a threat to the United States, and yet NBC is reporting that Admiral Bradley told the lawmakers the drugs were heading first to Suriname, that's another South American country, and then ultimately to Europe or Africa. How is a boat that's not heading to the United States an imminent threat to this country, Senator?
Well, that's one possibility based on the tactics and techniques that we've observed of these drug cartels. They send smaller boats to sea, and then they link up with a larger boat before they continue their mission. I didn't hear that specifically from Admiral Bradley in my briefing, but what we know is that these drug cartels, which are designated foreign terrorist organizations, are trafficking drugs to our shores. And when we have an opportunity to strike one of these boats, where the intelligence gives us high confidence that everyone on the boat is a valid target because they are associated with these cartels, then I think we need to strike it.
Senator, is there any hard evidence that shows that this particular boat was headed to the United States?
That didn't come up in my briefing.
So he can't provide any evidence, any information that that boat was headed to the United States, to our shores. And yet they still want to preach this idea that we had to blow that boat up. We had to kill everyone on board that boat because they were headed to our shores, that they are a direct, imminent threat to the United States of America. But now that we have all of the spin from Tom Cotton as far as what could have been happening, what might have been happening, what wasn't happening, what he didn't see, what wasn't in his meetings, what wasn't in his briefing, let's see what Ranking Member Jim Himes has to say about the changing narrative and the fact that he believes that that video should be released to the American public for you to see with your own eyes.
A week after this strike, there was a briefing for Congress. Why was a follow-up strike taken? The answer then, in the first week of September, was a follow-up strike was taken because we needed to clear the wreckage so that there wasn't a danger to navigation. That was explanation number one. Explanation number two, right before we watched the video, was that they might have had a radio and they might have been radioing a boat and they might have been trying to recover the cocaine. And then when you actually watch the video, you realize they don't have a radio. They're barely hanging on and not slipping beneath the the waves. Then we get this thing of how they're trying to right the boat. This was about a 40-foot boat that had just been hit with a massive piece of munitions. The conflagration probably destroyed everything in that boat, but maybe they might have swum under, gotten a radio, probably waterlogged, and radioed a boat that we're not even sure was there. So what we've had is a series of shifting explanations. And including the fog of war, right? You know that Hegseth said, well, they took the second strike because of the fog of war. There was no fog. The military watched this boat very carefully, or I shouldn't even say boat. They watched the wreckage of the boat very carefully for a long period of time before they took the second strike. So look, what Pete Hegseth says about this strike has zero credibility at this point.
Let's get another account from Representative Hymes on what he saw in his briefing on that video and how it left him feeling after he saw the video.
What I saw in that room was one of the most troubling things I've seen in my time in public service. Under the DoD manual for abiding by the laws of armed conflict, the specific example given of an impermissible action is attacking a shipwreck. Any American who sees the video that I saw will see the United States military attacking shipwrecked sailors. People will someday see this video and they will see that that video shows, if you don't have the broader context, an attack on shipwrecked sailors.
So Representative Hymes believes that you, the American public, should be able to see that video with your own eyes, to be able to make that determination on your own. I support that contention. I do believe that transparency is important, that we should be able to see the video, but I will say that after this reporting from The Atlantic, that it might be a tough video to watch. The Atlantic reported that the suspected drug traffickers, the lone survivors of a U.S. airstrike, were sprawled on a table-sized piece of floating wreckage in the Caribbean for more than 40 minutes. They were unarmed, incommunicado, and adrift as they repeatedly attempted to right what remained of their boat. At one point, the men raised their arms and seemed to signal to the U.S. aircraft above, a gesture who some watched a video of the incident interpreted as a sign of surrender. Then, a second explosion finished the men off, leaving only a bloody stain on the surface of the sea. Footage of the two men's desperate final moments made some viewers nauseated, leading one to nearly vomit. It's worse than we had been led to believe. And so now we're going to look at the reporting from NBC News on exactly what was testified to by Admiral Bradley during that hearing that Representative Hymes was speaking about. This is going to give us a lot more insight into what was said, what wasn't said, what happened. Now that you have the full backstory, let's see what actually happened as far as the reporting on the testimony from Admiral Bradley. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the U.S. military on September 2nd to kill all 11 people on a suspected drug smuggling boat in the Caribbean Sea because they were on an internal list of narco-terrorists who U.S. intelligence and military officials determined could be lethally targeted. Such a list includes individuals who are eligible for being targeted, including with lethal action if given the opportunity. U.S. intelligence officials had confirmed the identities of the 11 people on the boat and validated them as legitimate targets. The detail that the 11 people on the boat were on an internal U.S. military target list had not previously been made public. Admiral Bradley was the one who gave the orders for the additional strikes. He was the one that was brought in to testify behind closed doors to Congress, and here is some of the reporting on his testimony. Bradley told lawmakers that the orders he received from Hegseth were to kill the individuals on the approved target list, which included everyone on the boat, then destroy the drugs and sink the boat. Carolyn Leavitt told reporters on Monday that Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Bradley told lawmakers that the orders he received from Hegseth were to kill the individuals on the approved target list, which included everyone on the boat, then destroy the drugs and sink the boat. Carolyn Leavitt told reporters on Monday that Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Bradley told lawmakers that the second strike killed the two survivors, but did not sink the boat, so he ordered a third and fourth strike to complete the mission. Admiral Bradley was pressed about whether Hegseth gave an order to kill everyone on board, and he said that Hegseth told him to kill everyone on board and destroy the vessel. Bradley was asked whether Hegseth gave him a no-quarter order, which is an illegal military directive to kill all enemy combatants and show no mercy even if they surrender or are gravely injured. To which Bradley replied that he was not given such an order and would not have followed one if it had been given. Unlike a no-quarter order, an order to kill everyone on a target list is not forbidden under US and international law. The explosion killed 9 of the people on board, capsized the boat, and damaged the back of it, including the motor. Another part of the boat split off and caught fire, but a major section of the boat was not ablaze. The damage made the boat unlikely to continue navigating. For more than 30 minutes, Bradley said, he observed the 2 survivors among the wreckage. The cocaine was wrapped in plastic waterproof bundles, which likely made them more buoyant and may have contributed to the boat not sinking. The 2 survivors got on the side of the boat that was not on fire and were able to flip it over and eventually stand on it. Bradley observed them take off their shirts to check each other for wounds and told lawmakers that they did not appear to have any visible injuries. U.S. military aircraft overhead spotted the survivors waving their arms, but could not say with certainty whether or not they were signaling to the aircraft. U.S. intelligence also spotted another larger boat in the area, determining that the damaged boat was supposed to link up with it to transfer drugs onto the larger vessel. The larger boat was not on the approved target list that Bradley had, so he did not have the authority to strike it. But waiting to see if it came to try to salvage the damaged boat and 2 survivors was not a viable option. Bradley went on to explain that his decision to target the boat with the survivors was because the drugs were not destroyed and the individuals on the boat had not surrendered and were not visibly injured but were still on the list of approved targets. And while the survivors were not armed, he said the mission identified the drugs as the threat to the US, effectively deeming the cocaine as the weapon that could endanger Americans. US intelligence did not conclude that the drugs were headed to the US. Rather, it showed that the boat was traveling south toward another country in South America, Suriname, and that the drugs were eventually headed to Europe or Africa. So naturally, Trump was asked if he would authorize or support the release of the full video. I'm sure you won't be surprised that he gives contradictory answers 5 days apart, as it seems like he may not have remembered what he said when he said it.
President, you released video of that first boat strike on September 2nd, but not the second video. Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release. No problem.
You said you would have no problem with releasing the full video of that strike on September 2nd off the coast of Venezuela. Secretary Hegseth now says...
You said that. I didn't say that. This is ABC fake news.
So now fake news is anything that he doesn't remember because his memory is going great. Now, he was further pressed on this issue after he had said that I'll support whatever Hegseth says. But the question that he was asked and the pressing from the reporter was whether or not you, Donald Trump, support the release of the video. And again, he attacks yet another female reporter.
I'm totally fine with that. Are you committed to releasing the full video?
Didn't I just tell you that?
You said that it was up to Secretary Hegseth.
You're the most obnoxious reporter in the whole place. Let me just tell you, you are an obnoxious, a terrible reporter. And it's always the same thing with you. I told you, whatever Pete Hegseth wants to do is okay with me.
We still don't have the release of the full video, as I'm sure that you're not surprised. Now, that said, this whole thing has been structured around the idea that these drugs are coming to America. I know that we've seen cocaine in the reporting that we've gone through, but the center of the messaging that the Trump administration has been giving is that this is all centered around fentanyl. That fentanyl is coming from Venezuela into the United States, that it is poisoning the blood of our country, and that it is an immediate threat to the United States of America. It's all been centered around fentanyl. And you'll see that this messaging around fentanyl starts to crumble once we start looking into reports. And that leads me to question, is this really about fentanyl? Is this really about drugs?
I would just add one more point to remind the American public why these lethal strikes are taking place. Because this administration has designated these narco-terrorists as foreign terrorist organizations. The president has a right to take them out if they are threatening the United States of America and if they are bringing illegal narcotics that are killing our citizens at a record rate, which is what they are doing. And under the previous administration, there was enough fentanyl trafficked into our country to kill every American man, woman, and child many times over.
So a couple of points to be made there. One, she relates the drug boat strikes directly to fentanyl coming into the United States, and that these deaths are happening at the highest rate in American history, enough to kill every man, woman, and child in the United States, and that it's all Biden's fault. So we're going to check into some of those claims and see if what she's saying is true or if it's just propaganda. But first, we're going to see Pete Hegseth again talking about the narco-terrorists that are in our hemisphere, not necessarily bringing drugs to the United States in this statement, in our hemisphere, and that we're not going to allow that we're going to continue to attack them. That's the messaging that we've been given.
Control of our border. And then it's getting after and going after narco-terrorists and designated terrorist organizations in our own hemisphere. As I've said, and I'll say again, we've only just begun striking narco boats and putting narco-terrorists at the bottom of the ocean because they've been poisoning the American people. And Joe Biden tried to approach it with kid gloves. And allowed them to come across the border, cartels take over community, 20 million people, hundreds of thousands of Americans poisoned. And President Trump said, no, we're taking the gloves off. We're taking the fight to these designated terror organizations. And that's exactly what we're doing. So we're stopping the drugs, we're striking the boats, we're defeating narco-terrorists, and we're standing...
And you may say one thing, that drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%. And I don't know who the 9% is.
I'm not sure either, sir.
But down 91% by sea.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to strike right now. Which is the entire point, right? Deterrence has to matter, not arrest and hand over and then do it again, the rinse and repeat approach of previous administrations.
So again, the messaging is around the fact that Biden wasn't doing anything, that Biden's a bad guy, that he was the one that allowed this poisoning of the United States, and that Donald Trump is saving 25,000 lives every time that he bombs a boat. And here again is that same messaging that you're hearing over and over and over again from this Trump administration.
Bloodthirsty cartels. And very little, by the way, is coming in by water, in case you haven't known. The drugs aren't coming in by water. In fact, we can't even find any boats in the water anymore. We had boats, we were like a subway train loaded up with drugs. Every boat, every single boat that you see getting taken out kills 25,000 Americans. Think of that. Because it's pretty tough stuff. But it kills 25,000 Americans. So when you hear that, it's no longer tough.
And remember, on the boat strike in question, they were not headed towards the United States. They were headed away from the United States. They were headed towards Suriname. That U.S. intel says that those drugs that go to Suriname go not to the United States, but instead to Europe and to Africa. But here again is more messaging that those boat strikes, that boat strike saved 25,000 American lives.
Look, we have the greatest military in the world. We have the greatest weapons in the world, and you see a little bit of it there. One shot, everyone dead center. And the only way you can't feel bad about it is you realize that you won't feel badly about it, is you realize that every time you see that happen, you're saving 25,000 American lives. Every one of those boats that gets knocked out is saving 25,000 American lives, not to mention the torn up families all over the country. And whenever I see that, I say to myself, I just saved 25,000 lives.
So the whole messaging around these 25 million lives, or the fact that it could kill every man, woman, and child, every American, multiple times over, is the fact that they are dressing this up around the idea that these boats are bringing in fentanyl into our United States. But it's becomes pretty clear that that's not the case. And you can hear Rand Paul here stating exactly that.
number one, there is no fentanyl made in Venezuela. Not just a little bit, there's none being made in Venezuela. These are outboard boats that, in order for them to get to Miami, would have to stop and refuel 20 times. They're in all likely going to Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island right off of the coast of Venezuela. So there's a lot of reasons to be worried about this. But number one is the broader principle of when can you kill people indiscriminately? When you're at war. That's why when we declare war, it's supposed to be done by Congress. It's supposed to be thoughtful. It's supposed to be debated. And we're not supposed to do it willy-nilly. And then when you have war, you just kill people in the war zone. And even then there are rules of engagement. But interdicting drugs has always been a criminal activity and a criminal anti-crime sort of activity where we don't just summarily execute people. We actually present evidence and convict them.
We present evidence and we convict them, right? So then explain exactly why it is that Donald Trump made an announcement that he's closing the airspace over Venezuela. If these are drug boats and we are bombing them from high intelligence, like military capable drones, then why is it that we need to close the Venezuelan airspace? You can see here that Donald Trump announced to all airlines, pilots, drug dealers, and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety. This is not United States airspace. This is international airspace. There is no declaration of war, and yet he wants to close the airspace over Venezuela, which has a lot of people questioning exactly what this is about. If it's about drug dealers, or if there's a bigger picture, if there's a darker underlying reason as to why we need to close the airspace around Venezuela. And so you can see here with this post that not a single plane flying over Venezuela, a country of 30 million people with the world's largest oil reserves. Makes you wonder. 2,000 miles away, Donald Trump has closed the airspace around Venezuela. There are no planes flying in this area. And it seems like we're gearing up for something different than just strikes on drug boats. And when it comes to this idea that this is a war on drugs, that this is a war on cocaine, fentanyl, that this is trying to protect the American people from being poisoned by these drugs in America, it seems awfully suspicious and hypocritical when you start to look at Donald Trump's actions around recent pardons that he has made. This post directly talks about the fact that drugs in these boats are put on ships that are bound for Europe. No fentanyl comes to the USA from Venezuela. Less than 1% of cocaine in the USA comes from Venezuela. Trump pardons cocaine traffickers, dealers, and money launderers. So look at the people that Trump has pardoned. Juan Orlando Hernandez, who trafficked over 400 tons of cocaine into the US. You have Ross Ulbricht, the creator of the Silk Road dark website, selling over $200 million of illegal drugs. And then Changpeng Zhao laundered billions of dollars for drug traffickers and terrorists. These are people who are clearly in the drug trade, that are clearly enabling drugs, that are literally trafficking drugs, that are basically a drug kingpin that was convicted by an American court of law with evidence, prosecutors, court of law in the United States. And yet Donald Trump is pardoning these people while blowing up a little drug boat outside of Venezuela. And it does not make any sense. It doesn't make sense if you consider the fact that this is, if you believe them, that this is about drugs, that this is about drug boats, that this is about the poisoning of the American people. Realistically, it doesn't make sense when you consider the fact that he's telling you that this is about you. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about the American people. If this is not about drugs, then what is it about? Now, if you really need convincing that this is not about drugs, let's take a look at fentanyl use in the United States and also the capture of fentanyl drugs in the United States. You heard them talk about Joe Biden and how Joe Biden was soft on crime, was soft on drugs being brought into the United States. So let's look at facts. Let's look at data. Let's look at this chart. I'm going to take Chris Hayes as being sarcastic. in his comments here at the incredible job Trump did in curtailing fentanyl overdoses during his term. Remember, obviously, Donald Trump was president from 2016 to 2020. I'm pretty sure by looking at this that fentanyl overdoses skyrocketed during his administration, during the time that he was president. That is when, all the way up until about 2013, 2014, but as soon as 2015 hit, this has gone up sevenfold, 700% under his first administration. But okay, you say, this doesn't show data after 2020. What happened after Trump left presidency? This still doesn't cover Biden's term. What happened under Biden's term that this is all Biden's fault? So now we head over to this chart, fentanyl seizures in kilograms from 2019 to 2024. So let's look at the DEA and how much fentanyl that we're seizing in the United States during Biden's administration. Well, if we take a look, in 2019, there was only 4.5 thousand kilograms during Trump's presidency. That ramped up in 2020 up to 6.6 thousand. But during Biden's term, you can clearly see that the seizure of fentanyl in the United States skyrocketed. This is what was under Biden's administration. So when they're trying to tell you that this is all Biden's fault, look at the numbers yourself. Look at exactly what Biden was doing to try to curtail fentanyl in the United States. As a matter of fact, let's take it a step further. Let's look at where fentanyl comes from. They want to blame Biden and they want to blame Venezuela. We already heard Rand Paul talk about the fact that fentanyl does not come from Venezuela. But hey, Rand Paul might not be telling the truth. So let's take a closer look at, for instance, the DEA intelligence report from January 2020 about fentanyl flow to the United States. Our own intelligence agencies show that Mexico and China are the primary source countries for fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances trafficked directly into the United States. It is not coming from Venezuela. It's being processed and made in Mexico with precursors and machinery from China. It is coming from Mexico and China, not from Venezuela. That is our own intelligence agency showing exactly where they come from. But you might say, that was from January 2020. That doesn't give us the full picture. Maybe things have changed since then. So let's take that a step further. All right, on Congress.gov's website, under their report, Illicit Fentanyl and Mexico's Role, which was posted at the end of August 2025. Let's see what the intelligence communities had to say on their reports as far as where fentanyl is coming from. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl-related substances, resulted in 48,400 U.S. overdose deaths in 2024, down from more than 76,000 in 2023. So, I will say 48,000 overdoses are still a lot and still needs to be handled, but they are trending downward, not by a small amount. They're not just trending downward. That is about a 35 to 40% reduction in fentanyl overdose deaths in a single year. That's a major chunk happening between 2024 and 2023. They go on to state that according to the U.S. Department of State's 2025 International Narcotics Control Strategy Report, that the United States determined that Mexico was again the most significant source of illicit fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, significantly affecting the United States in 2024. It goes on to say that the DEA's 2025 National Drug Threat Assessment and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence's 2025 Annual Threat Assessment also concluded that Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations are primary suppliers of illicit drugs, including fentanyl, for the U.S. market. Again, they're coming from Mexico, not from Venezuela. And we can go even further into intelligence reports. Let's look at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reports. So when we look at their report, right at the very top, More than 90% of interdicted fentanyl is stopped at ports of entry, where cartels attempt to smuggle it primarily in vehicles driven by U.S. citizens. Those ports of entry are basically not all across the U.S.-Mexico border, where Donald Trump says that a border wall would stop a lot of these crossings and a lot of these drugs and everything. It's actually from the literal port of entry into the United States, where vehicles are driving through and being checked. 90% of the fentanyl that we stop from coming into the United States is not by air, is not by sea. It's literally at the ports of entry into the United States from Mexico. Furthermore, Kristi Noem mentioned in a cabinet meeting that it was cocaine that was on the boats, if we can even prove that, because they've been blown to pieces, but that it was cocaine on the boats, not fentanyl, that we are bombing these boats for. So this whole picture around fentanyl has nothing to do with Venezuela. And this chart goes further into that data on the CBP, showing that the precursors are made in China, they are shipped to Mexico for manufacture, and then they're smuggled into the country mostly by US citizens. So this goes into the nationality of individuals caught smuggling fentanyl at ports of entry from 2019 until June 2024. So if we look at that in blue, those are United States citizens that are actually smuggling fentanyl at ports of entry. These are not illegals. These are not illegal immigrants. These are not undocumented immigrants. These are not non-immigrants. The green that you'll see here, those are your Mexican nationals. Black is other. I didn't even notice that was even on this chart because it's so small. Blue is where it's at. These are United States citizens. These are Americans that are smuggling the fentanyl into the United States through those ports of entry, where we collect 90% or more of the fentanyl that we prevent from coming into the United States. And so just recently, Donald Trump was asked exactly that question. If the drugs are coming from Mexico and China, what does that have to do with Venezuela?
Almost all the illicit fentanyl in the United States is actually produced in Mexico using precursor chemicals from China, according to the DEA. And Venezuela isn't a significant source or transit country for fentanyl. It barely appears on the DEA's trafficking assessments.
Yeah. Well, they do send lots of drugs. Those boats come in largely from Venezuela, so I would say that's a significant. And you can see the drugs. You can see these bags all over the boat. I mean, just bags and bags.
So if it's about drugs,
bags.
Would you consider...
But let me tell you what they do. They send really, really bad people into our country, and they've done it better than anybody else. They emptied their prisons into our country, and these prisons are seriously tough. They entered, all of their prisons have been emptied into the United States of America. Murderers, 11,888 murderers.
And so he simply can't answer the question straight. He has no answer for it. There is no logical reason as to why we are attacking Venezuela for fentanyl when that's not even the case. He just says that they are bad people and that they're bringing drugs here on these boats. And basically, trust me, bro, that's why we're bombing and murdering and killing people. It makes no sense. And another piece that makes no sense is, if it is true that according to the DEA, that according to our intelligence, that 90% of our fentanyl is stopped at the US border, and if we were to look at the charts, most of those come through, a lot of it comes through Arizona, then I don't see how this makes any sense. The Arizona Attorney General had asked Pam Bondi for more DEA agents at her border so that we can stop the drug cartels from bringing those drugs here, from coming into the United States. Not only did they not give more agents as requested, they actually removed 60 agents from the border.
If you could have the resources you wanted, what would they be? What would you be doing in order to truly limit the amount of fentanyl that is coming in this country?
So, recently I sent a letter to Pam Bondi and I said, "Dear Pam, please send me an additional 50 DEA agents at a minimum down here to Arizona, because these are the folks that help me fight the Mexican drug cartels." And not only did she not send me 50 additional DEA agents, she actually took 60 DEA agents out of Arizona And I will tell you, I know these folks. They want to be going after the Mexican drug cartels. They want to be protecting this country against the scourge of these drugs. They want to be going after money laundering. We have 1 out of every 10 federal prosecutors now doing immigration enforcement, where they should be going after these drug cartels. Those are the kinds of resources we need, and we need a president who will allow them to go back to do their jobs.
So now I think we've pretty well debunked the fact that this is not about fentanyl coming from Venezuela. It's probably not about cocaine coming from Venezuela. That's less than, I think, 1% is what we saw. This is not about Mexican drug cartels, because we're not trying to stop them at the border. We're taking DEA agents away. We've got fentanyl overdoses reducing. We've got the Biden administration that was seriously ramped up as far as how much fentanyl that they were stopping from coming into the United States. That 90% of that fentanyl that is stopped from coming into the United States is done at Mexican ports of entry. So this pretty clearly, to me, based on the data and not what I'm being sold by the Trump regime, is clear that this is not about drugs. This is not about drug boats. This is an escalation. This is us bombing boats, murdering and killing people on a false pretense. And ultimately, now we can finally get around to the question, what is it really about? And I think most of you watching are smart enough to know, but I want to show you the evidence of what actually it is about. Because there is evidence. There is a clear message as to what this is about. And it's not just a fabrication. It's not trying to connect the dots. They've come out and said it. This is a post from Melanie Dorigo saying, if you still think Trump is going after Venezuela because of drug trafficking while pardoning notorious drug traffickers, and not oil while getting millions in donation from the oil and gas industry, then you probably haven't been paying attention to our forever wars. Look at the graphic as far as this goes. The largest oil reserves in the world. Venezuela by a long shot. There are 304,000 millions of barrels. That's 304 billion barrels of oil that they are sitting on. They have the world's largest oil reserves. I don't think there's any surprise that that is likely why we are going into and trying to invoke a war with Venezuela. This sounds eerily similar to Iraq, when we claimed that they had weapons of mass destruction, and we've been in that war still. These are our forever wars, that we continue to send our troops, our soldiers, our children into these wars for oil and for precious resources, and they're not even hiding it anymore. This is exactly what it's about. Here's a poll posted that only 17% of Americans support war against Venezuela. If we look at the chart from YouGov, more Americans oppose than favor the U.S. military using force to overthrow Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. If we look at all U.S. adult citizens, there's only 17% that favor removing him from power, that favor regime change in Venezuela. 45% oppose, 38% are not sure. They may not have enough information yet. That's why I try to bring this to you guys, to make sure that we understand what is actually going on in our geopolitical affairs. When you look at the partisan aspect of this, that the Republicans, 33% believe that we should go in and remove Nicolas Maduro and do a regime change in another country, whereas Democrats and independents, it is a small amount. And it's possible that the Republicans that do support that are getting fed information and news. I can't even call it news from Fox News, entertainment, because they're not a news network, right? They're an entertainment network, which they had to admit in a lawsuit because they were peddling false information to the public. And if they're a news organization, they can't give false information. They actually have to be held to standards. So instead, what they did was they rebranded themselves as an entertainment network, and now basically nothing that they say on there has to be true, so that they can just feed propaganda into the American people. And that's probably where still only 34%, but 34% of Republicans support us invading another country for regime change to overthrow Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Now, I'm not supporting Maduro. I don't think that he's a good person. I don't think there's a lot of great things happening there, but I don't know that it is our responsibility to just walk in there and overthrow a government just because we disagree with them. I don't think that's enough. Why would Donald Trump want a regime change from Nicolas Maduro? Is this really about the fact that Nicolas Maduro is corrupt? Because from everything that we've seen, Donald Trump likes corruption. He doesn't mind being paid off by people who are corrupt. He takes bribes for pardons all the time. So if this is about corruption, if this is about regime change, then is that really something that Donald Trump really cares about? He sides with Putin. He sides with Netanyahu. He has sided with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. He sides with all of these dictators, these warmongers. And so why is it that he would even give a shit about Nicolas Maduro and regime change within Venezuela? He says exactly how he would handle things like this back in 2011 in this interview.
Ultimately, the people will appreciate it. They're going to end up taking over the country eventually, but the people will appreciate it, and they should pay us back. But we have to go in to save these lives. We should do on a humanitarian basis, immediately go into Libya, knock this guy out very quickly, very surgically, very effectively.
So we should go in on a humanitarian basis. So we should tell people that it's for humanity, that it's for the good of the people, that these people are being oppressed and that they are being violently suppressed by their government, and that this is a humanitarian angle. That's what we should tell people, that it's humanitarian basis, and we should go in and we should knock this guy out of power and do regime change. That's what we should tell people. But why?
And save the lives. After it's all done, we go to the protesters who end up running the country. They're going to like us a lot better than they will if we don't do it. More importantly, we're going to save lives. And we should then say, by the way, from all of your oil, we want reimbursement. We should have said, we'll help you, but we want 50% of your oil. They would have absolutely said, okay, 100%. In fact, they would have said, how about 75%? So, and isn't it sad? We could have had anything we wanted. We could have had 50% of those oil fields. You know, in the old days, when you had a war, it's to the victor belong the spoils. So we could have had something special. When the so-called rebels came to us, we should have said, fellas, we're going to help you. We want 50% of your oil. They would have said, thank you very much. We have a deal. Write it down, sign it. We have a deal. We would have been a rich nation again. They have tremendous oil reserves in Libya. Instead, we help, we get nothing. We're very, very foolishly led.
All right, but I can already hear the pushback, right? This was in 2011. This was regarding Libya. This is not regarding the current situation that we are in. There's no way that this is the exact same thing. Like, how do you know? How do you know that this is the same thing? How do you know that he is just talking about Libya and he isn't talking about Venezuela? Because he said as much. This is Donald Trump in 2023 talking about Venezuela and oil and regime change in that country.
How about we're buying oil from Venezuela? When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door. But now we're buying oil from Venezuela, so we're making a dictator very rich. Can you believe this? Nobody can believe it.
So there it is, a pretty clear statement that we are buying oil from Venezuela and we shouldn't have to, and we're making a dictator very rich. But he makes it very clear exactly why he would go into Venezuela, because Venezuela has all of this oil and we could have had all of the oil. We could have been making so much money from all of it. That's what he says. And to take it further, there are multiple news organizations now, right-wing, typically news organizations, where people are going on and specifically talking about oil companies being in Venezuela, how much they would love to have that Venezuelan oil. It's these big oil companies that would benefit from us going to war with Venezuela, for us having a regime change in Venezuela.
We're talking about the largest reserves of oil in the world that will be doing business with the American oil companies. And that is something that I have made very sure that they understand. American companies in Venezuela for the next 100 years.
And trust me, there's plenty more like that. Now, as I was creating this video for everyone, breaking news has come forth where Donald Trump in a cabinet meeting, in a press conference, had literally said out loud, I think it might have been the quiet part, in the sense that I'm not sure that we necessarily knew this piece of information, but he comes out and says, as you guys know, we have captured the largest oil tanker ever captured in the Venezuelan waters, a Venezuelan oil tanker, and that we have gone on board like a pirate and captured that oil tanker in this conference. Take a look.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an interesting day from the standpoint of news. As you probably know, we've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening, so you'll be seeing that later, and you'll be talking about that later with some other people.
So from everything I could tell, we didn't have reporting on that before Donald Trump just mentions it in passing. But it's the largest oil tanker that has ever been captured, and we did so in Venezuelan waters, a Venezuelan oil tanker that we now have video of. And so lastly, at another meeting, Donald Trump was followed up with more questions as far as, what are we going to do with all the oil on that ship? What do you think his answer was? Sure, it's not surprising. Take a look.
We're interested in the seizure of this tanker. Well, what happens to the oil on that ship?
Well, we keep it, I guess.
Where does it go? What port does it go to?
Well, you have to follow the tanker. You know, you're a good newsman. Just follow the tanker.
Do you know where it's going? Was it going
Follow
to
it.
China?
Get a helicopter. Follow the tanker.
Is it sure it's going to
But we're gonna. I assume we're gonna keep the oil.
We're going to keep the oil. That's his answer. So I think that becomes pretty clear. This is not about drugs. This is not about bombing those boats. This is about trying to entice a conflict with Venezuela if they ever try to strike back at us, that it will escalate into a war with Venezuela, and it will escalate into regime change so that they can give us their oil and we can go in and take their oil. And we're already trying to do so by taking their tankers straight out of the ocean in an absolute pirate move. And again, all of this started back with the September 2nd strike on that boat, where we killed 9 of the people immediately. 2 people clung to the boat, waved their arms overhead, and then were exploded into a stain of blood on the ocean, nauseating Congress members, making our prosecutors and our attorneys in the United States and our congresspeople question whether or not we are committing war crimes in order to try to entice a war with Venezuela so that we can go in and that we can steal their oil. I'm sure that this story will continue to develop as we get more information, but it's up to you. You have eyes. You've seen a lot of the evidence that we now have as the public. Make up your mind. Take a look at everything that's in front of you and try to determine, is this a war crime? Is this murder, or is it absolutely justified? I don't think that the story that we're being told as American people personally is exactly what the truth is. It's not the truth. It is a lie. It is a smokescreen for a darker underlying story that they don't want us to know about, but it's plain as day. The Trump administration can't hide it. This is clearly about oil, and going back to whether or not Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump are committing war crimes in order to try to get that oil from Venezuela is the question that is at the forefront of a lot of the minds of the press and of the American people. If you do like the information that I bring to you guys and you want me to continue to do more of this, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, leave a comment as to how you feel about whether or not this is war crimes, as to how you feel about the reporting that I've brought to you. It means a lot to me and tells me that this reporting is important to you, the viewer, and that the way that I deliver it, the way that I bring it to you guys is something that you would like to see more of. So subscribe to my channel. You're watching The Matt Balla Show, and I'll see you next time.